The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
In the 1990s, it always felt like a matter of time before Alain Prost would take over Ligier, and when it finally happened in 1997, it got off to a great start. But behind the scenes, Prost had serious doubts about going through with it, even in the days before he signed the paperwork. And despite the team taking a credible 6th in the championship and almost winning a race, while star driver Olivier Panis was out with broken legs, 1997 was as good as it would get for Prost. I'm Glenn Freeman, and joining me for what I can assure you is not the only episode we will ever do on Prost Grand Prix here on Bring Back V10s are Karun, Chandhok and Matt Beer. Now, Karun, welcome back. Good to have you on again. You and Matt were both very quick to raise your hands for this episode when we started discussing ideas for Series 5. So, when you think of the first year of Alain Prost's F1 team, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Probably the Spanish Grand Prix. You know, all of a sudden we've got Panis in the Bridgestone-shod Prost Mugen Honda chasing down Jacques Villeneuve in what was the dominant car, what should have been the dominant car of that season. And at various points of the race, he was quicker than Jacques. So for me, yeah, that was a standout race really of that year.
What about you, Matt? There's quite a lot to choose from when we do one of these episodes where you're looking at a full season.
I'm going on a couple of weeks later than Karun, and a slightly different vibe. It's that Prost in the tyre wall in Montreal, and one of those things where the TV cuts to it and you think, oh, that doesn't look pleasant. That doesn't look comfy.
Yeah, that was a big moment in Prost's season. And who knows how the year might have looked without that incident. We will get to Canada and cover it in plenty of detail. Before we get into Prost in 1997, let's give some more shout outs to those of you leaving us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, which are always appreciated. So thank you to Johnny O 85, Chris J Thompson 84, Easter Ferrari, and Andy S17. And thank you to everyone who has been voting for us in the motorsport category of the Sports Podcast Awards. I said we'd do some shout outs for that as well. So thank you to Stephen Gate, Robert Dickinson, Ed Sir, and Jamie O'Leary for your support as well. By the time this episode comes out, voting should still be open. So if you'd like to vote for us or the Race F1 podcast, which is also nominated, you can vote for free. Head over to sportspodcastawards.com and find the motorsports category. We're nearing the end of the series now, so it won't be long before we're answering your questions for our final 2 episodes. You're almost out of time to get your questions in about anything to do with F1 from 1989 to 2005. But if you hurry, you can still submit them, as ever, using the hashtag BringBackV10s on Twitter or by emailing bringbackv10s@the-race.com. And remember, if you'd like to get early access to ad-free versions of the show, plus bonus content between series, among plenty of other benefits, check out the Race Members Club at the-race.com/members club. So we've mentioned in plenty of previous episodes how talk of Prost taking over Ligier always seemed to surface every couple of years, but it was clear by January of 1997 that this time it looked like it would finally get over the line. Before deciding to take the plunge with his own team, Prost had spent 1995 and part of 1996 in an advisory role for McLaren, and he said giving up that role was one of the few regrets he has from his career. Of course, we couldn't do an episode about Alain Prost without mentioning Maurice Hamilton's excellent book. I get asked about this book all the time, so if you're curious about it, it's simply called Alain Prost McLaren. So I guess if you search for Alain Prost McLaren book online, it will you'll find it pretty quickly. In that book, Prost says, "I was very happy working with McLaren, and one of my few regrets is that I left in 1996. Buying Ligier put an end to discussions Ron Dennis and I were having about what we could do together. One of the ideas we had was for me to have a McLaren team in America." So Matt, we can't pass up this opportunity to talk about late 90s IndyCar racing, because I doubt this was going to be a McLaren NASCAR team. Kart, as it was known at the time, was absolutely thriving in this era. So how do you think an Alain Prost-run McLaren team could have got on during those years?
I put so much thought into all the possibilities for this. I think it would have gone pretty well, and then very badly would be my suggestion. Now, I'm going to try and do this really quickly. This was a time at which you didn't need tons of experience to be successful in kart. You had teams like Tasman coming out of Indy Lights and being competitive straight away. Pac West rose very quickly. So the fact, as long as they got a decent engineer and had one of the decent packages on the grid, I think a McLaren and Prost branded team could have been a race winner really quickly. Maybe you would imagine they'd have aligned with what McLaren had in F1, so probably Mercedes engines and initially Goodyear tyres. Mercedes engines were pretty good in 97. I reckon maybe that Prost team would have done what Hogan did with Dario Franchitti in 97, which was be very fast and maybe crash less than Dario did at that point. But where I think it would have gone wrong is that they probably would have had to stay aligned with Mercedes because of the strength of the McLaren relationship in F1, and the Mercedes car engine absolutely nosedived in competitiveness in the second half of the 1990s. After being so awesome with Penske initially. So that element, I think he would have been dragged down by Mercedes, but also McLaren at that time doing kart, there would have been a lot of swaggering hubris, surely. Like Ron Dennis wouldn't have managed to avoid being massively condescending towards all of American motorsport. And can I imagine Alain Prost and Ron Dennis going off to the Indy Racing League when that started getting all the big teams and just going for a bunch of oval races? No, I really can't. So I think it would have started out pretty well, probably got quite embarrassing as Mercedes declined, and then they would have cut and run before things got really messy with the split.
So a bit like the Prost F1 team then. The sale of Ligier dragged on so much through January that the team ended up launching its 1997 car still as Ligier. Obviously at the launch, the main topic of conversation was Prost, who was not in attendance. Current team owner Flavio Briatore was, though, and he was happy to discuss the Prost situation at length. Briatore and Bernie Ecclestone said the deal was almost over the line for the team to become Prost, although Briatore stressed that the team was working as if nothing was going on in the background, and he was happy to keep it going as Ligier if things didn't work out. He also added that the team was only available to Prost, not to any other interested buyers. Briatore said this possibility with Prost was unique because it's good for the team and good for the people in Ligier. It's special conditions because Prost in France is a very special person. It's a very friendly deal. And Briatore added that Ligier was no longer in the dramatic financial state it was in when he bought into the team in 1994, and he'd finally bought out Guy Ligier's remaining stake just a few months earlier in the summer of 96, and he said the team was looking well as a business and was in a completely new era with a lot of potential. Karun, it's famously said that the main reason Briatore bought Ligier was to get his hands on the Renault engine deal for Benetton. But looking beyond that, given the state Ligier was in the early 90s, is it fair to say that Flavio did quite a good job shoring the team up behind the scenes?
I think so, yeah. I mean, if you look at, when Prost initially went to test and potentially buy Ligier, we're talking 92, aren't we? When this whole thing of him being an owner-driver came about, and he went and did those slightly bizarre tests at Paul Ricard wearing Eric Comas's helmet, when everyone quite clearly could see it was Alain Prost. I remember seeing the cover of Autosport, and it was, very clearly Alain Prost's nose, which you couldn't mistake. And you talk to people in that era, and I think who were around. I think it was a very serious conversation, and for various reasons, the deal didn't materialize. Prost went off to Williams for 93. And then the team, they were okay, weren't they? Ligier, sort of 93, 94, had the odd podiums with Blundell and, Hockenheim 94. I think you've done a podcast about that already. They had double podiums. So they were sort of there or thereabouts. I think the 95 Ligier was a very good car, in fact. They had that weird situation where Brundle was sharing the car, wasn't he, for half the season with Aguri Suzuki, which was a really odd setup, a bit like the Tonio Liuzzi and Christian Klein thing. So there were some weird things going on, but the car was they were a very solid midfield team. I think it's fair to say that, from Briatore's standpoint, he ended up with a Renault deal. He was able to, what's the best way to describe this? Have a technical collaboration between Benetton and Ligier, so that the Ligier looked a lot like the Benetton in 95 and 96. And yeah, they were a very solid midfield team, which, and he was probably making money out of it somehow, knowing Flavio.
Oh, he must have been. As we got to the end of January, the deal for Prost still wasn't done, but Peugeot came out and offered Prost their public support. Peugeot was entering the final year of a 3-year deal with Jordan in 1997, and there were doubts about it continuing in F1. However, Peugeot president Jacques Calvet said, "Prost can count on our support." At the end of 1997, Peugeot is available to become a technical partner of Prost's team, but with one condition: the investment must be inferior to what we currently have. So Matt, this Peugeot support would of course be from 1998 onwards, as Ligier already had a Mugen Honda engine deal for 97. But was that line from Peugeot about inferior investment perhaps an alarm bell?
Oh, massively. And especially at this point, it wasn't like Peugeot was at the peak of F1 and could afford to chill out a little bit. I mean, its first year with McLaren was spent basically catching fire and trying to get Philippe Alliot into the car, and then McLaren dumped it after a single year. Things were quite respectable with Jordan. 95 wasn't bad, 96 was all right in places. Now 97 would turn out to be really good. But at this point, when they're saying this, I remember the 96 Jordan Peugeot had some good runs at circuits like Hockenheim and Spa. I think on the speed trap figures it was always pretty good, but then Jordans were quite slippery at that point too, so it wasn't necessarily all a giant engine. But basically Peugeot hadn't yet conquered F1 and now was saying it wanted to invest less in something it wasn't succeeding at particularly already. It was that, other than the "we're all French here" element, there wasn't really a lot to sell this deal even at that stage.
The deal dragged on past a targeted deadline of January 31st, primarily because Prost needed agreement from all the other teams to change the name from Ligier, and Jordan was balking at agreeing to the change. The name change needed to happen for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Prost had French partners lined up who he said made it an essential requirement for Ligier to be renamed, as the team had previously had links to the previous government that was no longer in power. Also, by renaming Ligier rather than starting from scratch, Prost would be entitled to Ligier's slice of the prize money from F1. But Eddie Jordan was holding up the process because he wanted assurances that he'd be able to negotiate with Peugeot over a new engine supply deal alongside Prost from 1998. Peugeot and Prost up to this point had talked of an exclusive partnership. Even once the Prost takeover was confirmed, which we'll come to in a moment, Peugeot still called the tie-up exclusive, while admitting that Jordan would be allowed to sign with Peugeot as well if it wanted. Eddie Jordan wrote in his book that he felt a victim of French and F1 politics and moves behind the scenes Although given the way Peugeot's F1 programme would fizzle out with Prost, he added, those involved were actually doing Jordan a favour, although at the time I did not see it that way. So Karun, with EJ balking at allowing Prost to change their identity and kind of wanting to have this Peugeot option in his back pocket, was he being needlessly difficult or actually quite smart?
I think Eddie's a smart guy, and I think anything he does is generally because he's thought about it. At the end of the day, he, at that point, had a works Peugeot deal. As Matt's already highlighted, it wasn't necessarily the best engine in Formula One, but it was still a works deal. And, by the time they'd recovered from their McLaren debacle of 94, they were, respectable enough, weren't they? By the time we got to sort of 96, 97 with Jordan, they were a decent engine. Nothing outstanding. And I think from Eddie's standpoint, he could see it being both a financial loss as well as, of course, technological loss in terms of being a works support. So he was just trying to protect his interests and his team's interests, really.
Finally, in the middle of February, the deal for Ligier to become Prost Grand Prix was made official, and this was less than a month before the first race of the season. Prost said the hold-up over the name change was frustrating, but he thanked Jordan for understanding that it was good for Formula One to allow it to go through. Prost had tried to specify that Jordan would only get access to a year-old spec of engine if it re-signed with Peugeot, but Peugeot said it would supply the same spec if a new deal was done. A big topic of conversation at the launch was the idea of the team representing France. Prost took a strong stance on this, saying it's not a French national team, it's not a political team, it's a private team. It was very important to see that the government was very enthusiastic about this project. They were really interested and they tried to push. But it was more important for us to be private, or else you don't have the control. I want to make clear that I would not like you to think political authorities have put me in charge. Peugeot wasn't giving off quite the same vibe. Jacques Calvet said, we have been attracted by the national dimension of this project. I think that will be of huge benefit to the French automotive industry. It will demonstrate that this country can be in the lead. We can demonstrate that French technology is at the top level. We are a partner with something which we think will win, so we can say it's a French team. Prost is an international name, and he can promote his team and our partnership all over the world. So Matt, given all the different forces at work here, was Prost fighting a losing battle trying to convince people that this wasn't a French national team?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Not a hope at all. Even just the fact it was Prost getting involved with Ligier. I mean, Ligier had at least one French driver for the whole of its F1 existence, apart from 93, and then it signed two British blokes with such similar names, it might have thought it was just signing one as space for Eric Bernard or something originally. So Ligier just screamed French F1 team in everything about it. So throwing in France's national racing driver hero on top of that, and even more so with all the rhetoric coming out of Peugeot, with Briatore saying this is basically only happening because it's a French national team. I'm not surprised the world thought it was, because it was.
Deep down, Prost didn't feel quite the same way, and he said in several interviews that when it came time to complete the deal, already he was having doubts about going through with it, so he wasn't quite as convinced as he'd been making out at the launch. In 2010, he told Autosport in a special interview for the magazine's 60th anniversary that it was an error to embark on an adventure that I didn't feel was right from the very start, and to believe in a French project. In 2013, he told Maurice Hamilton for F1 Racing that he didn't want to do it, but he was being pushed politically. And he expanded on this in greater detail in 2018 on F1's official Beyond the Grid podcast with Tom Clarkson. Prost said he was approached by the French president, Jacques Chirac, because there was a chance that Ligier could disappear from F1 and Peugeot wanted to quit. Plus, Renault was pulling out at the end of 97, so in Prost's words, in France we had a big chance that Formula One would disappear completely. Prost felt that this was his time to give something back after all F1 had given him, but over the course of the discussions, the deal changed. He said he was brought in on the promise of huge sponsorship money from French companies and free engines from Peugeot, but then by the time the deal was ready to sign, half as much money was being promised by the sponsors, and Peugeot wanted paying for the engines. Prost said, 2 days before signing the contract, I said to the French president, I don't want to do it anymore because it's not what I thought and we are going nowhere. The president said, please do it for France. We will help you later on. I was never helped. That is the political aspect. This country is always like this. So, Karun, when we get so close to Prost signing the deal, should he have still been willing to trust his instincts there and back out, or was it too late?
I think he should have trusted his instincts, really. Well, it's easy to say in hindsight, but when you can sense that the money's not going to be there, and Prost, of all people, knew that, speed costs money, essentially, in the sport. How fast do you want to go? And he'd been with 3 of the biggest teams over the last 20 years of Formula One. He's been with McLaren, Ferrari and Williams, the 3 most successful teams, really, over the last 25 years preceding that. So he knew what proper, well-run, well-funded, big-budget operations were. And when he saw that this was not going to be the case for this team, really he should have just pulled the plug. It would have been a little bit of loss of face in the short term, and potentially people would have said he's abandoned this potentially brilliant French nationalistic project, and he would have taken a little bit of flack in the short term. But in the long term, he would have saved himself an awful lot of aggro and probably saved himself an awful lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, he took that flack anyway when the team went under, so he could have just got it out of the way sooner. And if we're to believe Briatore, he said that the team was able to keep running as he had it set up, so maybe it wasn't going to go to the wall. Who knows? But on track, while all of this was going on, things looked good. During all the wrangling behind the scenes, the combination of Olivier Panis, the Ligier Mugen Honda engine and brand new tyre supplier Bridgestone looked potent in testing, and Williams technical guru Patrick Head even predicted Panis could win a race. Panis scored points on Prost's debut in Australia with 5th place, then a maiden podium next time out in Brazil. Things could have got even better in Argentina, where Panis qualified 3rd and was running 2nd to eventual winner Jacques Villeneuve in the first stint of the race. Panis was planning to make one less stop than Villeneuve and was 7 seconds behind the Williams after 18 laps when his car broke down. But at this point, he was 12 seconds ahead of Eddie Irvine, who finished the race all over the back of Villeneuve, who was ill with food poisoning that weekend and faded in the closing stages. Got to get that excuse in there. Panis reckoned he could have won the race, and Prost said afterwards that the pride of being in the position to fight at the front of a Grand Prix overrode any disappointment the team felt about Panis retiring. So, Matt, I'm going to give you the task that I quite often give to Ed Straw on these podcasts. How do you think this race would have played out, and would Panis likely have won if his car had kept going?
I have attempted to work this out looking at lap times from the first half of the race when other cars
pitted. In true
pitted.
tribute to Ed.
Yeah, completely. And it's the sort of thing I used to do in 1997 when I was 16 and not quite getting into pubs yet. I'd spend my evenings doing this and working out alternative scenarios for Grand Prix. I think he would. There were quite a few options when 2 stoppers could have come in, and looking at what he did versus teammate what his teammate Nakano did, although that was skewed by how far down the grid Nakano qualified. There's a few question marks over where Ralf Schumacher and Johnny Herbert would have factored in terms of being traffic on the strategies they were on. But yeah, if he'd kept up a similar sort of pace, and then, he was tailing off a little bit compared to Villeneuve as that first stint went on, but then Villeneuve's pace plunged later on as his belly got problematic. I think it would have worked out pretty well for Prost. That not as good as Ed's calculation, but quite good calculation I've done has Panis being clearly ahead by the time the pit stops are finished.
There we go. So you definitely would have won the race. You can all write that down. Yeah.
Fact. Yeah.
Prost did get a reality check at Imola, where Panis started 4th but slipped back due to a broken anti-roll bar. But the main story for a Prost driver from this race involved Panis' teammate, Japanese rookie Shinji Nakano, who was wiped out in a collision with the arrows of reigning world champion Damon Hill. Hill blamed Nakano, saying, "I tried to pass him and he just turned in on me. I was being held up by a back marker and I could see I was losing time. I went for the gap. He just did not move over and turned in. I thought it was an ambitious move, but I wasn't going to chug around at the back of the field. I don't feel I should be doing that." Around this time, rumours surfaced for the first time, but not the last, that Prost was trying to replace Nakano. Ligier had signed Nakano after some encouragement from Mugen Honda, and he came with an engine supply discount reckoned to be around $4 million. That didn't stop Prost wondering if he could get Nakano out of the seat, potentially covering the losses through some other sponsorship and better prize money if he could find a faster replacement. Nakano felt he'd not been given enough testing mileage to get up to speed as a rookie, and after a few meetings with Mugen, it became clear that this was a battle Prost was going to struggle to win, so at the Spanish Grand Prix, he declared Nakano's drive safe. Now, Karun, feel free to comment on your mate Damon's collision with Nakano as well here, but what did you think about Nakano's place in the team? Was he out of his depth or being treated unfairly?
Well, the reality is he wasn't really at the same level as Panis, was he? He was a long way behind, and you could see from Prost's standpoint why he wanted him replaced. That was a very, very good car. Panis, after the Spanish Grand Prix, was third in the World Championship, only behind Villeneuve and Schumacher, who obviously, as we know, went on to fight for that title till the end. So you can see why, from Prost's standpoint, he's sitting there thinking, hang on a second, we're just throwing points away, because I think Nakano scored eventually in Canada. He got a point only after Panis obviously ended up in the barriers with his legs smashed up. But I could see why Prost wanted him replaced, really. Nakano wasn't he wasn't a bad driver, but he wasn't one of the better Japanese drivers. I think even when you look back in that era, you had the likes of Katayama and Aguri Suzuki, who were capable on their day of scoring good results and even the odd podium. I don't think Nakano was really at that level.
You successfully dodged a bit about Damon Hill there as well. Not his finest moment into the last corner at Imola. Tension between Mugen and Prost didn't get any better during this time when Peugeot engineers visited the Prost factory to get ahead on work for 1998, and Prost had to write a letter of apology to Mugen boss Hirotoshi Honda. Mugen engineering chief Tenji Sakai said Mugen didn't know if the Peugeot engineers saw anything of its engine, and he added, "We are not happy. Prost Grand Prix has apologised, and we hope it will never happen again." Prost said the Peugeot engineers didn't see anything and didn't need to anyway. Matt, was this really as much of a problem as Mugen was making out? I mean, Peugeot were going to have to start preparing for 98 with Prost at some point, surely.
It's context, isn't it? Really, it's you don't want to do this with a Japanese company involved because of the reputation they would have for doing things absolutely properly and with correct fairness, and also they're trying to sack his driver at the same time. So if that's winding them up on a weekly basis, then inviting their replacement to come around and potentially see their tech on the sly, it's not a good move. But no, you're absolutely right. They did have to start working on the car build at some point. There were rule changes coming up as well that would have had an impact. So in the normal circumstances, probably not a problem. If you're already finding ways to irritate your partner, don't put that on top.
As Karun mentioned at the start of the episode, Panis finished second in Spain, meaning that after 6 rounds of the season, he was third in the championship behind only Villeneuve and Schumacher. Autosport's Andrew Benson called Panis the surprise star of the season up to this point, and in an interview he did with the Frenchman, Panis said the team's 1997 car was so good it has changed my life. Panis credited Ligier with the decision to stop working on a flawed 1996 car to focus on 1997 development early, and he also took issue with suggestions that Prost's success was only down to Bridgestone, and he pointed out there was often a big gap between him and the next Bridgestone runner. Although in the same breath he somewhat weakened that argument as he said Prost was Bridgestone's lead development team, and in a recent interview on F1's Beyond the Grid podcast he told Tom Clarkson they were making tyres for our car and it made a huge difference. Now Karun, you said that Spanish Grand Prix where Panis charged through to second was your standout memory from this year. How impressed were you by everything we'd seen from the Prost-Panis combination up to this point?
I mean, super impressed, right? As you said, they nearly won in Argentina. They were very competitive, and it was genuine pace. It wasn't like they were getting results because everyone in front of them had fallen off. They was qualifying well and running with good pace. And I've been led to believe by more than one person that Spanish Grand Prix was the key point at which both McLaren and Benetton decided to switch to Bridgestone for 1998. They saw what Panis achieved that weekend, and they conclusively decided that, hang on a second, this Bridgestone tyre is proving to be a lot better than we expected it to be. And I think, I can't remember where I read it, even recently, that it was a key point for Ron Dennis to make the decision as well. But I think certainly the engineers, I recall some of the people telling me at the time, that they watch Panis, especially if you look at the tyre deck, and that stage Barcelona they were quite prone to blistering because they had the two fast corners toward the end of the lap. Think back to the Hungarian Grand Prix where the Goodyears were all struggling with blistering, and you had this extraordinary sight of Damon and the Arrows on Bridgestone tyres going past Michael Schumacher. And I think this was a big shock, I think, in some ways to Goodyear, that Bridgestone had arrived and straight off the bat in their first proper season of Formula One, they were very, very competitive as a tyre manufacturer. And even the wet tyre, right? Look at Barrichello in Monaco. It wasn't just the slicks. It was actually, they nailed it even on the wets. So on the whole, I think it was a big marker for Bridgestone. So I understand why Panis wants to play down, Bridgestone's role in all of this. But the reality is, I think Bridgestone had a big part to play in their competitiveness.
Yeah, completely. And I think Bridgestone used to have a motorsport history site in English. I think it only exists in Japanese now. And in there, they did a section on joining the F1 grid in '97, and they said that they'd initially planned to come in for '98, but then they realised that they'd been developing the tyres for so long, and Goodyear had gone so many years without competition, that Bridgestone actually decided in Japan, well, let's not give Goodyear a year to kind of get their development heads on and prepare for us to come in. So they made the jump a year earlier than they'd originally planned. And this was the result of it. This was a company that was clearly pushing on with tyre development against Goodyear, who hadn't had any competition since Pirelli in the early 90s. And those Pirellis were only good in very set circumstances. Unfortunately, it was at the Canadian Grand Prix next time out where Panis suffered a massive crash and broke both of his legs late in the race. So we go straight from Karun's main memory of the year to Matt's. The accident was caused by a suspension failure at the rear of the car, which pitched the Prost into the wall on the right-hand side and then back across onto the left into the tyre barrier. The front of the car went straight through the tyres and then broke in contact with the concrete wall behind it. Speaking on Beyond the Grid, Panis said he was worried about needing to have a leg amputated, so he asked the marshals to get him out of the car as quick as possible so he could get a better idea of what was going on. And at the time, the marshals were criticised for this because they shouldn't have removed him before the doctors arrived on the scene. Panis added, "I wanted to feel myself, try to get out of the car and feel everything. The accident was a big one. I saw my legs were broken. I saw it was bad, but I wanted to be sure I could feel everything." Panis was rushed to hospital, where he was seen by a doctor who had finished a shift that afternoon and left to go on holiday. But when the doctor heard on the radio that an F1 driver had been injured, he rushed back to work because he was an F1 fan and he felt he needed to help. Panis asked that doctor if he would be able to race again, and the doctor said it was possible if they operated on the Sunday night. When he told Panis the recovery would be quicker if they put pins in both legs, Panis said go for it. So Matt, as we know, clearly this derailed the middle of Prost's season. With the momentum Panis had at this stage of the year, what do you think was possible without this accident? Could he have hung on to third in the championship and maybe won a race at some point?
Well, I've worked this out as well. So, Ed, when you listen, I hope you're at least slightly proud. Yeah, I simulated the rest of the season, not particularly scientifically, just looking at what Trulli and Nakano did and what Panis might have done instead. And he doesn't quite hang on to... It depends if we're looking at third with Schumacher in the points or without. I think he ends up fifth with Schumacher removed, but he's only 4 points behind David Coulthard in third place and 3 behind Alesi. And he does win Hungary along the way, because in my scribbled on a bit of paper simulation, looking at what Nakano did, looking at how good the Bridgestones were, I think Panis would have had that. There were a lot of races in the second half of the season, though, where the Bridgestones didn't really do much on any car. And I don't think Panis would have changed that. So there were races where he would have been, lower top 10 out of the points completely. I think he'd been there for a lot of Bridgestone's very best days, even before the accident. But yeah, I mean, 5th in the championship in what had been a Ligier the year before. I know the guy had got that random Monaco win, but that's a very serious outcome, and a very impressive stat if he'd been able to pull that off, which I'm declaring as fact based on my calculations that he 100% definitely would have done.
Yeah, very impressive achievement and very impressive working out there. I love that. So yeah, we'll lock that one in as well. Prost obviously needed a replacement driver, and a shootout test was quickly set up between French driver Emmanuel Collard, who'd been linked to Nakano's seat already, and Minardi rookie Jarno Trulli. Prost also tried to get Williams test driver Jean-Christophe Bouillon, another French option, but Williams wouldn't release him. Trulli came out on top, with Prost praising his speed and consistency and his technical feedback. He later said, "I had to choose in a very short time. It was not easy. I was already a fan of Jarno's, and when we tested him, it was obvious that he was the best choice, even if it was quite difficult because Emmanuel is French, but I need to think of the team first." Karun, what did you think of the decision to bring Trulli over from Minardi? Was this a smart move? Was Trulli kind of an obvious candidate?
I think it was the right decision to bring Trulli on board. He was race sharp. Admittedly, he was in a Minardi, but the reality was at least he was racing that year. He was highly rated. He'd come out of Formula 3 where he'd been very, very competitive. Won the Macau Grand Prix the year before, really, but on a countback, had it taken away from him, it got awarded to Ralph Furman. And he was a very, very... He was actually hot property at that time, wasn't he? He was one of this generation of young talents coming into F1 who people are talking about, potentially being there for many years to come and winning all these races. And so I think it was a good move from Prost to put him in there. There weren't really that many drivers around, I don't think, with experience who would have been a better choice. So if there aren't any experienced candidates around who are free and contractually available to stick in the car, why not go for a young hotshot who could prove to be quite useful? And in the end, I think Jarno, he scored points in Germany that year, didn't he? I think he did a decent job, but clearly Panis' shunt had just completely knocked the wind out of Prost's sails that year.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, when you think about it. Who else was around? Maybe they could have brought Martin Brundle out of retirement. I don't think he was quite ready for the commentary box in 97. Prost effectively said that Collard missed out because of fitness, adding, "Selecting somebody that was immediately operational, especially in terms of fitness, was a key consideration. We thought long and hard about the possibility of Emmanuel Collard taking over from Olivier. However, in Emmanuel's current physical situation, this would have been a premature decision, and we decided mutually not to take the risk." Collard spoke about this to Autosport's James Newbold in 2021, saying he was completely destroyed mentally and physically after suffering late race heartbreak at Le Mans with Porsche just before this. And he felt that with the close links between Prost and Trulli's manager Briatore, it was decided who would get the drive before the test even took place. Collard said, "They called me, but I don't know why. I think they had no choice. They had to call a French driver. I was the only one at the time, so they called me because they had to. It was a joke at the end. When you are not driving a Formula 1 car for more than 1 year, your neck is destroyed. They knew this, so why did they call me? That was an excuse. That's it. I think the deal was done before." So Matt, that's Collard's side of the story. Any sympathy?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't think he was massively well treated there, but I also don't think that there was a huge injustice in the outcome. It was more the process was a bit harsh and clumsy. Now, I saw the opinion of Sam Smith, our Formula E writer, on this because he's so much better than me on early 90s Formula 3000 and on sports cars, and just how did you rate Collard? And he was very, very positive about him. Just felt his face never fitted in F1, but that was a bit harsh because of the form he'd shown elsewhere. He did test for a lot of teams in the early 90s, almost one of those people who'd tested with so many teams that if none of them ever put him in a race seat, that was probably for logical reasons. Sam did also get the opinion of a driver who'd moved in similar circles to Collard to see what this person felt about him. And the reply he got was just, fast but fragile. So, yeah, somewhere between those 2 points, probably.
Trulli delivered on the faith placed in him immediately by qualifying 6th in France for the team's home race, although he slipped back in the race and then lost out when a late gamble on intermediates didn't pay off. From there, his form was patchy. He finished 8th at Silverstone, where he was outraced by Nakano. Then he got that 4th place in Germany to pick up his first points. He was a distant 7th and behind Nakano again in Hungary, where Damon Hill's Bridgestone-shod arrows should have won the race. And then Trulli's car wouldn't fire up on the grid in Belgium, and he finished 10th in Italy. We'll come to his final race for Prost in this season in a moment, because the Austrian Grand Prix was a bit special. But reflecting on this summer run of races later in the year, Prost said he found Trulli's form somewhat puzzling. He said, "I still thought he had potential, but he wasn't using it, and I didn't know why. For me, they were not technical reasons, but psychological." So, Karun, let's ignore Austria for a moment. How would you assess Trulli's first 6 races for Prost, especially in the circumstances he faced, being promoted as a rookie with just a handful of races under his belt already?
It's never easy, right? It's never easy to be dropped into someone else's car in the middle of the season. We've seen great drivers have to do that, and some struggle and some haven't. And I think, he did a decent job, and he was a rookie as well. It's not like he had years and years of knowledge in the back of his head to just rely on if he's been dropped into it. Think of Mansell 94, straight in, Magnico, bang, front row of the Williams, challenging for pole. But Nigel had a decade of racing experience in Formula One to bank on by that stage, and Jarno didn't. He didn't even have a dozen races at that stage. So I think the fact that he had the ups and downs is sort of symptomatic of a rookie, but now when you look back at the rest of Jarno's career, you kind of go, well, it's kind of symptomatic of Jarno as well, wasn't it? We kind of saw that, these brilliant highs around Monaco and Suzuka and the Toyota and places like that, and then some races where he just didn't turn up. So, it's funny, now when you look back in hindsight, whether that was an indicator of what the rest of his time in F1 would be. But very, very, very quick driver, and I think as we're about to discuss, Austria was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I think it's actually funny when you look back at it. It really was a sign of things to come, which I don't think any of us really thought that at the time. You just assumed that with experience, he would harness his speed a bit better. But Panis made his return to the F1 paddock at the Belgian Grand Prix, where it was announced that he had signed a new contract with the team for 1998 and 99. The second seat was more interesting, though, as Prost thought he was close to getting Damon Hill to be Panis' teammate. However, this became a bit of a saga, with Prost even admitting to the French media that despite daily contact between both parties, one day it's going to happen, the next it's not. In the end, Hill signed for Jordan, and Prost didn't hold back, saying he was disappointed with how Hill conducted himself. Prost believed they had a firm deal, and he felt Hill had tried to use the Jordan offer as a way to get more money out of Prost. Prost added, "We were great friends when we drove together at Williams in 1993, but I have now seen him in a different light. It is just as well we didn't manage to do a deal. I did feel that Damon was the perfect driver to help take us forward, but it looks as if I was wrong." Hill reacted angrily to this in an interview with David Tremayne, who we recently had on our Spa 1992 episode. Damon said, "Why does everyone think I'm so into money? If that were the case, I would have taken Sauber's offer." And I'll just interject here to say that offer from Sauber was $1 million per race, regardless of results. Damon said, I'm sick and tired of all of this. What I wanted was the right environment, and I didn't think I would get that at Prost with a French team, a French engine, and a French teammate. Damon referenced that final comment in his book, where he said that upset Prost, as it came across as Damon saying the team was too French. But Karun, you know Damon much better than we do. Do you think he would have played games with Prost over money?
But even if he did, possibly, and if he did, it's kind of his job, to be honest. A racing driver's career is finite, and they've got to do everything they can to negotiate the best deal. And let's be honest, he was trying to negotiate a deal with Eddie Jordan and Alain Prost, two pretty shrewd and experienced operators in the sport. Damon, was at the stage of this negotiation we're talking about, he's still the reigning world champion. So there's market value in that. He'd driven some good races for Arrows. Obviously Budapest we all talk about, but even at Jerez, the last race of the year, he qualified within a couple of tenths of pole, actually. We all forget that bit because we're sort of distracted by the top three being equal and on that pole position time.
I think it was within a tenth. I think
exactly.
It was within a tenth.
So, Damon was driving actually really well in 97. It's just the car was a dog. So I think, I understand why Alain was probably upset, but it's Damon's job to negotiate the best deal he can for himself. And when we look back at it, going to Jordan was the right place to go. If you look at the competitiveness of 98 and 99, the Jordan was a great car from sort of Silverstone 98, wasn't it? Whereas the Prost just kept slipping further and further backwards.
Yeah, Damon definitely dodged a bullet by not signing for Prost. So the Jordan deal for Hill was announced at the Austrian Grand Prix, and this would be Trulli's final start of the season. And as we said, this was a memorable one. Jarno started third and took the lead at the end of the first lap when Mika Häkkinen's McLaren broke down, as it had a habit of doing in 97. Trulli led the first 37 laps of the race. Then he was jumped by Villeneuve's Williams in the pit stops. And after 58 of the 71 laps, he suffered heartbreak when his engine blew up while running second. Trulli said in the first half of the race, he was in total control and he was managing his pace, occasionally speeding up to show the cars behind that he had more in hand if he needed it. But he felt the engine start to lose power a few laps before his stop, which he reckoned was why Villeneuve was able to jump him. So Matt, this drive went unrewarded on the day, but how good was this performance?
Might have been Trulli's second best F1 drive in his whole career, hadn't it, after the Monaco win. That interesting line about him feeling the engine start to go is a nice get out, because that's the point in the performance where you think, oh, he's turned into future Trulli. Until then, he's so in control, he's consistent, he's got some time in hand, and okay, good day for Bridgestone's car is good, but he wasn't just a rookie. His car racing career before 97 had been very short as well. And he's been thrown into this situation. He's got championship contenders in his wake. The pressure on that on someone who we wouldn't, in retrospect, have seen as the most psychologically strong of that generation as well. And he's handling that with good, consistent performance, not getting rattled. And then engine goes sick. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, assume it was the engine going sick and not Trulli's pace just going, ah. But if a podium would have been brilliant that day if the car had kept going. I think that was a massively impressive drive, and it would have been great if he could have done that a bit more regularly over the next decade and a bit.
Yeah, and I looked into this as well, because I remember it as a Bridgestone race, but because the Stewarts were up there as well. But I think the Stewarts two stopped, so they obviously looked good at the start of the race because they were lighter on fuel, whereas Trulli's pace was totally legit. But a week later at the Nürburgring, Panis was back. He'd missed 7 races since his accident in mid-June, and here he was just before the end of September racing in F1 again. By this point, Panis had already tested an F3 car and an F1 car, and he said Prost had tried to call him in on his first run during the F1 test because he was already going so fast. Panis said the big challenge at that test was to make sure he could take the first corner at Manicourt flat out straight away, because if he couldn't, then it meant he was scared and his F1 career would be finished. The main challenge he faced in returning to the cockpit was generating enough braking power, so he asked the team to make him a big brake pedal so he could brake with both feet, and he told them not to tell Prost. Panis would race with the pins in his legs for 18 months, and he said in his Beyond the Grid interview, "When I was driving, I don't even think about the pins. I say I have a stronger leg. I know if I have a crash, it's bad, but what I do is my dream. I'm not even thinking about the pins." At the time, Panis called his Nürburgring comeback a training race, and Prost added that while it was maybe one race too soon, he appreciated it was important to Panis to come back as quickly as possible, and he also felt it was just a preparation exercise for the final 2 races of the year. But Panis still scored a point, and Prost felt he could have gone even quicker if he'd not lost places at the start and got stuck in traffic. So Karun, for Panis to come back 3.5 months after breaking both legs and immediately finish in the points, how impressive is that?
Really impressive. I mean, and the Nürburgring is a tricky circuit. You don't have a lot of time for rest, to be honest. While it's a narrow track, you've got lots of cambers on the road, so the minimum speeds are quite high. So for a driver who's been out of the cockpit for, as you say, for 7 races and all that time, that's quite a challenge to come back to. And I think the fact he arrived and was immediately able to get the car back into the points, which is where really the Prost deserved to be all season long in terms of pace, was super impressive.
That would, however, be the last point Prost would score in 1997. Bridgestone's first home race at Suzuka was disappointing, and Mugen also had a weekend to forget there with 5 engine failures across the weekend. Then at Jerez, Panis started 9th and finished 7th on a weekend where the Bridgestone tyres were better suited to arrows, hence Damon Hill was leading the way up behind the 3-way tie on the grid. But Panis also reckoned that Prost had been left behind slightly over the course of the season. He said a mid-season rule change that opened up how the electronics could be used for throttle control had hurt Prost, and he also said the chassis hadn't changed much, which supported a theory that Prost's design team had perhaps run out of development potential with its car concept, which dated back to 1995 when it first started enjoying what I think Karun described earlier as a close technical relationship with Benetton. Benetton, and in particular Flavio Briatore, have always denied that there was any data sharing going on here, but Panis was flat out in his Beyond the Grid interview. Speaking about 1997, he said, "We still had the people of Benetton doing the car. For me, in 1997, it was a Benetton Honda. We were doing it ourselves at Ligier, but it was all the technical points of Benetton, and we put in the Mugen engine, which was a fantastic engine, and we had Bridgestone tyres. The car we had that season was unbelievable. We felt we had put our finger on something. We believed in 1998 we would kill everyone, but it was not the case. In the winter of 97-98, we made our own car in the factory, and this car was a disaster." So Matt, was the way Prost's season petered out a little bit once Panis returned perhaps the first sign that the team was lacking on the technical side?
Yeah, very much so. I think the way Panis describes that is spot on, really. Because of the Benetton-based heritage, this was the first time you really saw what a Prost team could do, and it wasn't very good. And it was dragging out what it could with the inherited stuff. But no, it was the trajectory was pretty clear in retrospect. The fact that Panis had come back with that injury, with his legs still compromised, did give it a bit of a question mark. Was it his fitness? Was it the car? Bridgestone was up and down still. Mugen, like you say, had a pretty disastrous Suzuka. So there were lots of things that it could have been. But when you look at the whole journey that Ligier went on of really only being respectable once Benetton was involved, apart from 93, which was a kind of cool anomaly with Brundle and Blundell. That technical package was only good when it could rely heavily on something inherited off Briatore's lot, and everything that followed 97 really hammered that home.
Now, Prost had tried to dump Nakano again for that season finale at Jerez, and once again Mugen said no. But after the season, Trulli signed a 2-year deal with the team for 98 and 99. Prost praised Trulli for the job he did in difficult circumstances and the ease with which he adapted, plus his desire to learn, his motivation and the quality of his work. He also praised the maturity Trulli showed in leading the Austrian Grand Prix, which Prost felt was a result of the Hill rumours coming to an end. Prost said, "I told him the Tuesday before Austria that Damon was not going to join the team, and that seemed to change his whole approach. We always supported him, but it was not easy for him to hear all the time that Damon could be joining the team. Resisting this pressure is part of the game, but he is 23 and has only competed in 40 car races, so it's very difficult." Trulli said he was thrilled to continue his career with Prost, adding, "There is no doubt that the team has a great future ahead of it." Oh, Jarno, if only you had known. But Karun, let's take hindsight out of this for a moment. At the end of the first year, with Panis and Trulli signed up, Peugeot coming in, they'd had a great season with Jordan. Did it look like Prost had set itself up well for the future?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it and go, they didn't have a Works deal. It wasn't a Works Honda deal, it was a Mugen deal. They had Nakano in the car, who was decent, but not brilliant. And yet they were right up there. The car, in terms of being quick enough to score points was a really good car. And you sort of look at it and go, hang on a second, with surely Prost is going to be able to access all these sponsors and all this backing from France. You've got a Peugeot engine. This is going to be brilliant. They're guaranteed that they're going to be in the top 5. And lo and behold, that wasn't the case.
It just sums up the misery of the winter of 97 into 98 for me, because 97 is my favourite F1 season. So wide open, and yet a brilliant one-on-one title battle, being a great storyline at the front. And then 98 for me was just rubbish. We'd gone from nearly every team getting a podium at some point to everyone who wasn't McLaren and Ferrari being terrible. And you had so many teams at the end of 97 who you thought, oh, they were really promising, but now they're adding this. Like Stewart will have a whole year of experience. Okay, Arrows has lost Hill, but Salo's really good. Jordan's hit really on an upward trajectory. Benetton's refreshing its driver lineup, and Prost, it's got 2 really good drivers. Peugeot's got quite good with Jordan now. This will definitely work. And then, yeah, like I say, there's only 2 competitive teams, and for me, 98 was just absolutely dismal. Some of those teams that got 98 wrong then got respect, and 99 was pretty good. But apart from a few laps of Melbourne where Prost looked pretty good and a bit of clever weather radar reading, this was a tone set for Prost, really.
There's a good preview there to what I guess will be the next instalment of the Prost Grand Prix story. But yeah, I think the technical side, Prost, for 97, the Ligier design team had made some changes to the Benetton, but fundamentally they had a Benetton car and it was their job to improve just the aero. Whereas 98, the rules change. You've got to start from scratch. You're doing it on your own. And they were massively found wanting. So yeah, it was a real shame. It's only downhill for Prost from there. The end, of course, in 2001 and the start of 2002, before they finally go under, is another story in itself that we will also do in great detail in the future. But we felt it was important to start the Prost Grand Prix story, which, as I say, people constantly ask us, when are we going to talk about this team? We've started at the beginning. We've started with the good story, and basically any other episode we do about this team will be about all the times that were dreadful. So we will leave it there. It started well, but perhaps Prost should have listened to himself when he had those doubts about doing it in the first place. And maybe Panis breaking his legs was a sign that it was doomed from the start. But thanks to Karun and Matt for joining us for this one. Thanks for your enthusiasm when I first suggested the episode. You both wanted to be on it. Good to have you two both along again. If you're listening to this and you haven't got your question in about anything to do with F1's V10 era from 1989 to 2005, you don't have much more time, as we'll be recording those episodes very soon. So get those questions in using the hashtag BringBackV10s on Twitter, or email bringbackv10s@the-race.com. Before then, we have a couple more of our regular episodes to get through. And next time we're heading to 2005 and a race that featured a thrilling finish as Fernando Alonso and Michael Schumacher did battle all the way to the checkered flag in that year's San Marino Grand Prix.